Okay, for this sample we're going to look at doing buttonholes and sewing on a button as well using the machine. So a couple things you need is you need the buttonhole foot, which looks like this. You need a button, the size that you want to use. And what we're going to do first is we're going to create like a button stand to actually sew our buttonholes onto. So what you need is you need a piece of material that is 30 centimeters long by about 10 centimeters on the short edge. Now we're going to create a button stand, but another thing you could have is you could have a facing. So this top here has a facing, it creates a seamless finish, and if you look on the inside we have this facing piece here. Now this is interfaced, so it's got iron-on interfacing to stiffen the fabric to make it more structured for us to sew our buttonholes into. But for this fabric here, this is quite thick, so I'm actually not going to worry about interfacing it. So the first step, we're going to mark our notches for our button stand, and what that is going to be is 4 centimeters from a long edge. You're going to mark 1 centimeter, and then from there 3 centimeters or 4 centimeters from the edge, and then do the same up the top. So 1 centimeter from the edge, and then what I'm going to do as well, I'm going to snip those marks. So I'm notching it. When you notch, make sure you don't cut too long. It's just about 3 or 4 millimeters. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to the iron. I'm going to iron up that first centimeter and then iron over at the next notch. So I'll do that and come back. Okay, so ironed over at my notches. So here was the centimeter and here is the 4 centimeter mark to make my button stand. Now the first thing I'm going to do is stitch nice and close to that fold to stitch that button stand down. Okay, so I've stitched along the fold of my button stand to secure it. Now that's the underside, so now I'm going to turn it over and I need to mark where my buttons are going to go. Just trim that thread off. So looking at this, our buttons will run parallel to our edge down the center. So I'm going to work out what the center is going to be. So I've got 0 and 2.8. Yeah, that looks like 2.8. So I'm just going to mark the center point. Now if you were doing this on an actual garment you were making, you would use chalk. Okay, I'm just using a lead pencil because the lead pencil's got a nice sharpened end, and I can get a nice clear line on here. So I'm just drawing in that center line, and now I can mark where my buttons are going to go. Now I'm just going to mark the top of the button, and I'm going to start at the top here, do a little line across, and then I'm going to measure down 6 centimeters and do a mark every 6 centimeters, because I want quite a few opportunities to practice the buttonhole. So I'm going to end up with 5 buttonholes. Okay, so now we're going to set up our machine with our buttonhole foot, which is this one. Now this is the front part and this is the back. So what we need to do first is we need to place our button in the back and close it. So it slides open at the back, pop our button in, and then we close it. We do this because this is going to automatically sew the buttonhole the size we need it for, this size button. Next thing we need to do is take our presser foot off. So there should be a little black button or a red button at the back. It drops off. And then looking for this part here, the little shank that it gets attached to, we're going to pop that under. It can be a little bit hard because there's not much room. Line it up and then just drop the foot down to catch that. Next thing we have to do at the side here, we have this part at the back that pulls down, and that needs to sit there. So you can have a look at the side. This part here slides down and just sits there. And the next thing we need to do is change our settings. So we're going to go to the buttonhole here. And we're going to change our width to 3 and our length to, this here is actually a picture of a buttonhole. We're going to put it just on the left hand side or the left hand end of the buttonhole. And then we're ready to sew. It's going to zoom in a little bit. So can you see on the foot here, there's a little line there. Well, there's two kind of curved bits and a little line in the middle. That's what we're going to line up our line of our fabric with. So a couple things, pop your presser foot up. And I've got my mark here, and what the buttonhole does is it sews backwards from that mark. And I'm going to put it under my foot. And then I can see my mark there. I need the line to line up with that little middle bit of the white plastic, and I need my needle to go into one side. So looking at that, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. It is a little bit hard to see, but I've got my needle in on my mark, and the line is lined up with the middle of the presser foot. Okay. Now to sew, all I need to do is make sure that my fabric is parallel with my edge of my foot here, and I just literally sew and it will do the buttonhole itself. I'm holding the back here, just making sure it remains parallel. When you get back to the start of the buttonhole, it will do a couple stitches on top of where you started, and then you need to stop. Okay, so it will do a couple stitches there, and then don't keep going because it will just sew in the one spot. So that's my first buttonhole. And then I can move on and do my next. But to move on, I need to just click out of the buttonhole setting here and click back in, and that's going to reset my machine to stitch my buttonhole. So I can go back, reline up my mark with my needle. Now this time the needle is on the left hand side of the mark. Because it goes a zigzag, it's either going to start on the right hand side or the left hand side. Line it up, make sure my material is parallel to the foot, and I can go. Just let it do a couple stitches back where it started, and then take it out, and then you can move on. Okay, so they're mostly in line with the line I drew. This fabric's quite thick, So that's another thing to consider. If your fabric is quite thick or you've got some bulkiness, it may not stitch exactly where you want it. So again, click out of the buttonhole setting, click back in, and then line it up to do your next one. I'm just going to keep going until I've done all 5, and then I'm going to show you how to do the button. Okay, so that's the 5th one done. Now I can trim all those threads, and I can show you how to actually open up your buttonhole. So I'll just show you the one, so you don't have to sit there and watch me trim all the threads and open the one. But what you do is you get a quick unpick, you put it in at the bottom, making sure you're not slicing through any threads. And then you fold that buttonhole so the quick unpick comes out at the top of the buttonhole. So when I say the top, it's the top of the opening, not the top of the stitch. I don't know if you can see that there. And then really carefully, you're going to slice open that buttonhole. Now you might be tempted to put it in here and just push, but the risk is you might slice through the end of your stitches. So we'll do that again, pop it in at the bottom, then pop the end out at the top, making sure you're not going through any stitches, and then fold it and slice through, and that's your buttonhole. Alright, now we're going to just stitch a button here using the machine. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of our foot, and we're going to change it to zigzag. So stitch 12, leave this on 3, put this to 0. And I'm just going to mark a point for my button to go. I'm going to take my button out of here. And I'm going to put my button on my mark. And then very gently, oops, put a slider under without it moving. And then very carefully move your needle down so it goes into the one side. So you can see my needle's on the right at the moment. So I've put it in the right hole of the button. Now I'm going to put my foot down, and that's going to hold my button in place. Then using the hand wheel, I'm going to stitch my button in place. So back and forth, maybe like 20 times or so. I wouldn't use the foot pedal because you may snap the needle on the edge of the button, and we don't want that. Alright, take it out, trim your threads. So your button is sewn on. Don't have to do it by hand, which is very time consuming, especially if you've got a few buttons. And then that should actually fit in that buttonhole. Beautiful. So that's that sample finished. Trim up your threads, write your name on it, and you can hand it up.